Oh, goody.
All right, what's going on, everybody? Zombies here again, and we're back with another Marvel Snap video. So in this one, we are checking out an Alioth Galactus deck. This is the build I've been trying out a bunch since Alioth was released the other night, and have been pretty pleasantly surprised by it. If you checked out the Day 1 Alioth decks video, you might notice this is fairly similar to one of the ones I posted over there. However, did tweak it a little bit, and I've been pretty happy with how this deck has been working out. I was a little concerned initially that Alioth wouldn't really be that impactful due to kind of Loki's ever-looming presence in the meta right now, and how he can effectively steal the card and use it more effectively than you can. But I've been pretty surprised at this deck doing fairly well across the board, even into some Loki gamers. So what's the overall game plan of this deck? Well, we are a Galactus deck, and Alioth has shored up a really big weakness for Galactus. So when Galactus was previously adjusted, so you have to be winning the lane in order for his effect to go off, that brought a pretty big downside to the archetype. Usually we were trying to close out with Death or Null to win the game with a bunch of power on the final turn. Previously, before the adjustment, it was easy to throw priority with Galactus because he was only 3 power. Your opponents usually had at least a bit more power than that in the lane, so they couldn't really interact with the big things you were playing. Now, with the new condition, Galactus has to be winning the lane. So more often than not, actually the vast majority of the time, you're going to have priority going into that final turn if your Galactus does go off. That's been a pretty big downside, especially with Shang-Chi being one of the most popular tech cards in the game. And Alioth finally gives us a way to close out the game that is not caring about an opposing Shang-Chi. Because if we have priority going into the final turn, we just slam Alioth, the opponent's stuff blows up, and we win the game. I actually don't think you could make a more perfect closing card for Galactus if you tried. I think there are other applications for this card though, and we're going to explore them in the near future. But for now, in this deck, I've really liked it as just a surefire way to end the game if we get priority in that Galactus lane, and sometimes even without Galactus, just guaranteeing us a lane that maybe the opponent hasn't been fighting for, especially if we have priority. In terms of the other cards in this list, we are a Nimrod-focused deck. So what I like about the Nimrod package is not only does it have synergy with Galactus, so if Galactus goes off, we get some Nimrods in the Galactus lane, maybe some big ones if we get Shuri off before then. But on top of that, we have a backup plan of winning the game that doesn't necessarily involve ever having to use Galactus, in case our opponent's running counters, or in case it's just a game where it doesn't seem like a viable path to victory. So the Nimrod package we have here is Shuri and Nimrod, make some big Nimrods, and then we have Destroyer and Venom as our main ways of blowing up the Nimrod to spread the power around the board, as well as Galactus. We're running the standard ramp package here of Electro and Wave. Electro is really nice. It lets us cheat out our 5-drops on turn 4, so we can slam down an early Nimrod or an early Hobgoblin, follow it up with a Galactus or a Destroyer, and then try and close out the game with Alioth and maybe Death on the final turn. Goblins have been pretty nice pieces of interaction here in just clogging up the opponent's board, paving the way for Galactus sometimes, and they have nice synergy with the Destroyer, because if we do go the Destroyer route, we really appreciate the fact that these Goblins are not on our side of the board. Daredevil's been an all-star in this list. He used to be super popular in Galactus decks, but he kind of fell off over time, I feel like, and in this one, I think he makes a whole ton of sense, as when you are going the Galactus route, being able to guarantee you know where your opponent's playing their cards can drastically change the outcome of the game by either making it a sure thing you're going to get your Galactus off, or maybe allowing you to pivot from the Galactus plan to slam down a Hobgoblin, a Nimrod, Alioth, or Destroyer instead, if that looks like a better play relative to what the opponent is putting down that turn. I did consider a second Destroy enabler for the Nimrod package here, like Carnage or Deathlock, but overall I found that between Destroyer and Venom, if you really want to lean extra hard into the Nimrod Destroyer plan, you could run an extra Destroy card. If you want to run that, I'd probably put it in the Green Goblin slot personally. Maybe Daredevil, but I think Daredevil just has too much utility to drop from this current list personally. Wave has been really nice in this deck as well, enabling an early Galactus, and that is actually one of the ways I find you can put up a relatively decent fight against the Loki decks going around. The Loki decks don't really run any high power cards outside of, well, the Collector when he gets big, because they're just running cheap stuff to generate cards in their hand and then try and close out the game with your cards. So if you do get that wave on turn 3, you can often slam a Galactus on turn 4, and there's not always a whole ton they can do about it. And this is especially effective against the Loki decks as they really need their board space to actually be able to play the cards that they're generating in hand. I also find that sometimes the cards we give them can be kind of awkward as they're generally getting them later on in the game, usually going into turn 4 or turn 5. So the cards we have here don't always line up to be very effective for them. We're also running a lot of high cost cards, so even with their mana cheat, they're not really easily able to play a ton of our cards at the same time. Initially, I wasn't running Death in this list, but over time I did add her back. I was experimenting with that slot, a few different things like Jeff, like Snow Guard. Tried a few different things in that slot, but ended up going back to Death as I figured that we're not going to draw Alioth every single game, so sometimes we're going to value being able to have a cheap thing we can play post Galactus, and it has nice synergy if our opponent happens to be blowing stuff up on their own, or if we just blow up a decent amount of stuff with our Destroyer. I ended up snagging a pretty quick Infinity ticket with this deck earlier this evening, was playing some games on mobile, just testing things out, and I found this deck to be pretty effective. I think it has that extra oomph in Conquest because your opponent has to play around multiple axes of attack, where if they are trying to respect your Galactus, they often really can't respect you going the Shuri Nimrod Destroyer plan. So you really kind of put them in a corner into having to pick one thing to play around, which I think is a big part of why this deck is strong. Alioth has also been really effective with the alternate game plan with Nimrod, because if we ramp out Nimrod on turn 4, we blow it up with the Destroyer on turn 5, that often usually allows us to get priority, and we can use Alioth to sometimes guarantee that third lane. So yeah, I really like this deck. If you're someone who's been missing Galactus since things got changed and I feel like you fell out of the meta a bit, I think this is one you should really give a shot. I've been pleasantly surprised with how it works, and I really like how it doesn't feel overly linear compared to some older Galactus lists where the main plan was you're just going for Galactus every time, and if you miss on Galactus, you don't really have a good way to win. I think the Nimrod package really earns its spot for that reason, as it feels like the best backup game plan you have access to in this style of shell. One other card I want to shout out is Professor X. I think Professor X has a lot of good synergy with Electro and Alioth here, as if you can close down a lane on turn 4 with Professor X, you can usually use Alioth to close out the game on turn 6. So I think that's something worth considering, but obviously there is some anti-synergy with X and Nimrod, because if you get X down, then all of a sudden you're not able to get value out of your Nimrod, blowing it up around the board. So something worth considering, but I think if you do that, you might want to build this deck a little bit differently, as I don't think Nimrod and X overlap super duper well, but could still be worth trying if that's a card you like playing. But yeah, that's going to wrap it up for this video. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Did you pick up Alioth? Have you been trying it out? I've been pleasantly surprised with how fun this card is to play and how strong it is in the right case scenarios where you set up for it. It really makes priority matter, which is something I think is generally always a good thing in Snap when a deck really cares about gaining priority, because I think priority is one of the more skill testing things in the game that a lot of players don't necessarily think about as much as they should. But yeah, let me know what you think of the deck, how you've been liking Alioth in the comments below, and we're definitely going to be checking out some more other decks with the card soon, so stay tuned for that. But that's going to wrap it up for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, remember to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.